Hello, hello. We're back. How are you?
I'm doing well, Casey.
Yay.
Good. Hey, everybody. My name is Sidney Edwards. I am an interpreter of the enslaved at historic Locust Grove.
Hi, everybody. I'm Caisey Cole. I am also an interpreter at Locust Grove as one of the enslaved.
And today we're going to talk a little bit more about our experiences with that and at historic Locust Grove. It's something not a lot of people know about, so I'm really excited for this opportunity to dig into it a little more and give people some details.
Yeah. So I think just start it all off for a little bit. I think first impressions about the gig in general. When I first popped into the scene, I was confused about it in general. Like, I was like, wait, people are voluntarily being an enslaved person at a plantation. And so I was kind of confused myself, but I also was curious, naturally curious person. So I'm not sure what you thought, Sid, but I was like, what's going on here? But
Yeah.
also kind of like, how does one do this?
A little bit of the same. I remember there were several African-American women in the department at U of L in the theater department when I was there, but it's presented to all of us at some point. And I think it's completely understandable that a person would not want to play an enslaved person. There's a lot behind that, some people are still, there's generational trauma is a real thing, should I say. And I understand that people would not be cool with that. But again, that general curiosity. Also, I think the fact that we're compensated with internship credits and in different ways definitely helps as well. So there's a motivating factor. We're not just doing it to do it, but at the same time, it's a really good opportunity.
Yes.
I like that Carol Ailey made it a point that we would be compensated for this work. And that's one of the things that made me feel safe there, to know that, okay, I'm valued in the space, was one of the reasons I was okay with coming on.
Yes. And especially because there wasn't just a throw you out there kind of deal. It was just more of a, hey, we have a process. I know that you've done a whole bunch of research, and a lot of what you've done for me is my blueprint for what's going into the next steps of me creating my character. Because at the end of the day, we are recreating lived experiences. And we don't know how much of it is out there, nor do we know like how much of it will be out there. There's, so little. And, maybe there's a lot at some point, if we stepped upon it, but at this point, there's just like so little to work off of. So it's about devising a character from that. So I'm still in the process of it, but I'm really curious to know about, how much time it took for you to put all of that together.
All right, good question. So I remember it has to do with training and research, right? So before I even went into training, there was all this research that I needed to do. I got a lot of books from Liebert, who works there as well, and she's amazing. But it was books on like Kentucky history, and books on actual historic Locust Grove, like what is the history of that place and of that family, which is really important to know, because people really tend to, as I found out later, they ask me about that too, because the people that come there, they know. Some of them know, but some of them don't. Some of them are new, but there are people that come all the time, and they know. They're like the history people know. So like having to be on board and like know those things. I chose a character based on a document that they found that had the names of several of the enslaved people there, kind of just what they did, or just when they lived there. It was mostly just a list of names. We didn't get to know a lot about them. There are a couple mentioned in letters, like Kit, stuff like that. But Rose was listed, and she was listed as someone who was a lazy worker, right? And we talked about, is she really lazy, or is this some
Exactly.
passive resistance, right? So we took that route with it because it's definitely more interesting. But yeah, reading everything I can, and I had a season to do that and to kind of report back before I even stepped into the role before even just interpreting. I don't know, did you have a period like that too, where you're like gathering information for yourself?
I am currently in the process of doing that. Like you said, I have to study up on Kentucky's history in general, because for the audience, I'm actually from Florida. I am a transplant. I got here 2 years ago for my MFA, and I know squat diddly about Kentucky history. Barely knew about the Derby before I got here. So coming here and trying to figure out all of that history and figure out not only about Locust Grove, but about the surrounding area and what life was just like in Kentucky in general back in this time period, I have a lot more research to do. I am looking into a project that we're hopefully, trying to, you know, push through about the emancipation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the emancipation, and in that time period, and I'm really excited for that. But otherwise, I like don't know a character that I could be or a person that I could be, and I'm like just trying to figure out pieces and bits and things like that, and see if there's any way to find like other sources that we haven't explored. And I don't know better than the historians, so I'm like I don't know exactly where to start besides from your material.
Yeah.
So I'm starting from there and from some major events that happened in Locust Grove, and then just kind of backpedaling into what might have been, what the slaves might have been portrayed as.
Right. And you're not only, because I'm still researching. Like I did my initial stuff, but I'm still having to go back and learn stuff all the time, you know? So it really comes down to this mix of what we can find historically, what we can find as fact, which is not a lot, and then how we can interpret that. How can we use our imagination as an actor, as a performer? It's a very valuable tool for this, because what we're building essentially are composite characters. We might find pieces of different people's life and incorporate it into this one representative life that we are, creating, right? So might not be true for one person. We might pick pieces from a bunch of people and make that our experience for our character. So, I mean, people might not be, well, here's the thing. Nobody would ever know that that's what we did, right? As that we do a good job.
No, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Brandon Jacobs Jenkins.
Yeah.
Yes, the playwright. But there is the show An Octoroon, and he writes in the stage directions, we don't know how slaves talked. We don't know how slaves talked, and neither do you. And so don't pretend that you know, and just do it. And
Yeah.
I found that like very freeing, just bringing it back to this, because at the end of the day, there's a lot we just do not know. And our theatrical training and our now newly gained historian training is combining and mixing with that. And honestly, I don't know many reenactors that haven't had a theatrical background, but even so, the way that it's adopted is so intricate and so innately theatrical that like you have to kind of adopt that.
So let me ask you this. How do you feel about dialect when interpreting?
So
What do you do?
what do I do? I mean, I have heard since I've been here some real Kentucky drawl, and from there I kind of brought some of that out. I don't pretend to really be from Kentucky, but that is what was heard, and to the enslaved, that is how they could be heard. So by copying and inhabiting that, that's like what I try and use. I try and use the accents of the people around me, because that's what they would have used. And on top of that, I know that some people, some enslaved folk did have their standard accent beforehand. If I'm not mistaken, Sojourner Truth, there's a debate that she's actually from the Caribbean, or had a Caribbean accent, and spoke in patois. And so her accent may not be far off from, like, say, my parents. So it would be something that I would just emulate my parents or something known. I don't like try and make it up on the spot there myself.
So one thing that I did learn is that a lot of slaves would have taken after the dialect or the accent of whoever owned them, because that's who they would have been around. So that's a factual thing. Me personally, I have a bit of a Southern dialect actually, because I'm from North Carolina. So I use like a light version of that. It's just, it's definitely Southern. It might not be Kentucky, but I just use a light version of that. I also have to be mindful because when we're interpreting, we're sometimes out there for hours. So I have to think about what I can vocally sustain. I might not be able to vocally sustain a Kentucky draw for hours if I'm talking to so many people, especially like the 4th of July when people come in and the different events.
Yep.
So, which leads me to training. So once I had all the research out of the way, or had started it, I should say, it's never done. It's never done. But I was able to put on the costume, right?
Yeah.
Put something on and have experience. And I'm grateful that I was kind of able to ease into it as a third person interpreter first. To just get there and get used to being in costume, get used to eyes on me in a different way, and get used to my environment as far as what I'm physically doing and learning those things. So I first learned the distillery, which was great. So I was just out there learning like everybody else. I just happened to be a person in costume for right now. Just like, let me get this down first. And then when I went to the kitchen, I learned kitchen stuff. Actually, I think we had a special training for that because Locust Grove has special trainings for different things. Like I know you did like the butter.
I'm churning my butter.
We'll do another distillery training soon. But just getting hands-on, learning in third person. And once I got comfortable doing it, then I slowly moved into adding the character and doing it in first person.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I personally do not feel comfortable just yet going into first.
It takes a lot.
It takes a lot of confidence to like take that leap. Especially because we have like a very historically rich and historically like enthusiastic crowd. Yeah. And so a lot of people come in and they probably know more than I do. I don't know. They probably just know more than I do. And I'm just like, I don't want to, one, tarnish what was already here. And two, say something out the side of my mouth that it may or may not be true. Because I mean, there is the general experience that we as Black people know about the enslaved, but the specific experience from plantation to plantation is also very important. So I take more stock in the process of getting there. I like when I put on the costume, first of all, I love costuming in general. Yeah. And so then this kind of feels a little sacred, putting on exactly what's going on out there, because then once I have this on, I'm just like, what are people going to think of me? It's just that thought that passes through my head. I'm like, what are people going to think? Do they know who I am? What's going to happen to me while I'm in this outfit? Because our clothes designate one thing and the enslaved clothes designate something entirely different. You're traveling back in time. And it like, even the way that I put the head wrap on, it's very specific, so that, it doesn't seem that we're just slapping something on and we're putting on a show. It's not that. It's really trying to dig into what the truth is of the enslaved without causing physical harm to ourselves.
Yes. And so speaking of like, how will people see me? One thing that I'm very grateful for is how supportive the staff at Locust Grove is, and all of the volunteers as well. I have had like a tremendous amount of support from them on all levels, and I've always been really grateful for that, because if that wasn't the case, this wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't be possible for me. I know that much. But
I know that some of the docents have swooped in and helped me at some points. They either just like move everything along, or they break it up, or they answer the question for me. So I know
Yes.
that, yeah, I know that all of these have happened before, and I'm like so grateful for every part of that. So I completely understand that staff is integral to this process because they are kind of a reminder that this is something of a facade, but it's as close to the truth as we want to get right now.
So what I like to do is talk about some of our experiences in the field. I know you haven't been doing it as much, but you know, everybody's got something to contribute. I know when I first started, I was definitely doing it solo, as the only enslaved interpreter, and I would encounter other interpreters that were playing members of the family, and we really struggled at first to figure out how to interact with each other. They didn't know what to say to me. I didn't know what to say to them. Sometimes it would just be a nod. And that actually felt like enough, to be honest. That felt like
Yeah,
enough. I'm going to acknowledge you, but we probably wouldn't have had a relationship where we could really talk, especially in
yeah.
front of.
Unless we're talking about like the caretakers, I don't think that there would have been like a huge relationship between the two of us. Um, I gosh, I don't think I've had that interaction just yet.
Okay.
I guess maybe in the Hearth Kitchen, considering that during Christmastide, the people that came from another plantation, another historical site, they were white. So I guess that relationship could have been different. I think that we made it so third person at that point in time that it was very much not. And also, I think we all got swept up, but just in the joy of the season, that it was an overall like friendlier, more flowing atmosphere. And plus, we were all just cooking our butts off. So,
That's stuff to focus on.
yeah, exactly.
um,
Exactly. So that's
have you
all the experience I've had so far.
Okay. So far, okay. So I've had several different ones. Like, so that's where I started, like right where you are, and it's a good place to be. It's fine. Eventually, when I moved into the kitchen, it was a lot easier because, or it was sometimes at the distillery too, but it was easier for me to interact with patrons when members of the family weren't around because I felt like I had more of a freedom to speak. There weren't those eyes on me, like the eyes from my time or whatever it is. And so
Yes.
I started to develop a script for myself, like a short script, and I would hit the same points for everybody that came through. And so it gets into a rhythm. And that's one thing, I feel like that's when I really like hit my stride, when I was like, these are the points that I'm going to talk about all the time and just keep it going. And it works. Some of the most fun times I've had played opposite of a man playing an enslaved person. And so we got to interact in certain ways, and let other people watch. So it becomes a bit of theater, which is, what we're doing anyway. And so those interactions were really comfortable. And then we take it out to the audience, right? But again, we had a script and points to hit. And that's what makes it work, because you don't want to feel like you're out there and don't know what to say. A lot of the time, you're going to get the same questions anyway. Or I have to do a lot of prompting, especially when it's children. I have to prompt questions like, do you know? And it's really easy in the kitchen because there's so many things to play with.
Yes. So much
like,
food.
You know what this is? Do you know what this is? And it got to a point in the kitchen, especially when I was doing it by myself, it was like I was a transplant from 1816 into the current year. And I was like, I've heard that you guys have something like this. Well, this is what I do. This is a waffle maker. Does your waffle maker look like this? That kind of thing.
That's so cute. I love that. I too really love interacting with kids when it comes to this, because it's a hard topic to reach. I personally remember, and I'm sure this is like a universal experience when it comes to Black kids in schools, when you hit that slavery chapter in American history, and everybody just like looks at you for a second and then looks away. And I'm like, great. Like I feel so comfortable. And us having a space where we are ironically taking charge. I think it's very ironically, because we have, you know, the command of the whole room, and that's where the kids are, their attention's going to lie. And it's a completely different kind of education. And I think that it's more visceral forms of education are more effective, at least for me. And I'm certain that they're more effective for a lot of other children. And so I personally don't mind being that face that people see, because I think that slavery is portrayed to be so long ago, when really, you know, 150 years is about 2.5 lifetimes. My grandfather's 96 now, so he is only 1 lifetime removed from it. And so it's really like something that I appreciate, having the power to be able to educate.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate it actually more with children than adults, because
Yeah.
again, I might come across, you know, the one historian that knows way too much, and I don't know enough. So I'd rather just teach.
That's way scarier than the kids. It's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I always love to like make it as transparent and as clear as possible when I'm dealing with them. So it got to the point where I would say, hey, y'all, I'm an enslaved person. Do you know what that means? And some of them would say yes. And if they said yes, then I would tell them to tell me what it means. Like, you know, and I would explain to them that my life is not my own, that I have to do the things that these people ask me to do, that I can't go off on my own. I can't do anything because I'm not allowed to, because I'm somebody's property. Like I had to break it down. And then you see their face change, but it's an important change. It's an important realization that they might not have had otherwise. You know?
I had one of my kids say that's not fair. Like, that's really mean. And I'm like, I mean, yes, you know, the how fast they get it is astonishing. And I'm always like pleasantly surprised, but also like really proud that they have that kind of empathy already. And they're just, you know, trying to catch on to what's going on. And hopefully I'll be able to, you know, keep doing that for them in the future. Personally, I have not had any like hairy or odd guest experiences. And I know myself that Locust Grove and Louisville in general is a place that really strives for education, and like it's really a place that I don't think I could actually have a bad experience. You never know. But you know, from doing our research, I've heard from multiple sources that it doesn't have to be like a bad experience, but it certainly has been for multiple interpreters. So I feel kind of blessed in that sense.
Yeah, it's not as easy in other places as it is here, you know. And I've only run into I wouldn't say hairy, but interesting things. So I've run across people that are scared to interact with me, like they just don't know what to say. And then there are some people that are, you know, they just take a little bit of coaxing, or people that are, or some people that are all into it. But a lot of times they'll just wind up having, just a regular conversation, you know. I ran into one person. This happened one time. I happened to be in the gift shop area. I was going back somewhere. And this older lady, I don't remember how the conversation got going, but I was in person. And she said, so do they treat you well in regards to the family and my relationship to them? And one thing I've always appreciated about the team at Locust Grove is they give you full permission or whatever to break character if you need to break character and address something. And I don't know if I really broke character with this one, but I said, well, my life is not my own. So I don't really know how good or well that could be, or how that could compensate for my situation. I don't remember what I said, but I made sure to address it. Because I was like, in no way does their treatment of me justify it at all.
Yeah.
But that's important, because if I wasn't there and she didn't see me and she didn't ask that question.
You might have been you were probably the right person to ask at that point in time, because, you know, we don't know like where this could have gone or what her experience could have been.
Right.
And just that conversation could have changed her perspective.
Yes.
And again, being the physical presence there, not just talking about it, because I think at this point in history, us talking about it so much has made it seem like the enslaved, again, was so long ago, but also
Right.
somewhat of a mythical being.
Hmm.
As in, like, they just, not that they didn't really exist, but they existed in such huge quantities that they never had a mind of their own.
Right.
And like,
That
here
is,
you are.
it's not a, it's almost like we weren't real people in their minds
Exactly.
times. And this,
And
I know she didn't mean no harm, right? She didn't think about that, but now she did. But she had to at that point.
yeah. And it might have been a double-sided question. Like, she might have meant like, how's employment here or something. But
Yeah.
just that wording is like, well, wait, it kind of just like makes the gears go a minute. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And just having that physical presence and that like very visceral confrontation, because not all confrontations are bad. It's just, you know, this is the talks that need to happen. I'm hoping that she went and other people went to these locations, especially Locust Grove, for that specific reason. I'm
Which
hoping
leads
so.
to how we want people to interact with us when we're interpreting.
Yes.
A very interesting conversation to have. So I'm always grateful for the people that key in to, okay, this is an actor. They're pretending, so I can pretend too, right? People that like click into that. And I think it's great. I love when people ask me about what I'm doing, like what I'm physically doing. That is a great
Yes.
way to open the conversation, start the dialogue. And if it ends there, that's fine. That's a great interaction, but it can also lead to other things.
Yes.
So it leads to questions about my life. So, oh, where do you live? Or what is your day like? And it's really great when you can have a docent that can really prompt and ask those questions for you, especially if they already know kind of what your script is.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they in and give the participants those the really historical fact pieces that you as the interpreter can't really give in first person, like that outside perspective.
Yes.
Um, it's yeah, I think it's really cool when they're just apt for having a conversation. Now, what is something, I guess I know you've had good experiences so far, but I'm trying to think of like maybe things that would not be appropriate to interact with an interpreter. What do you think?
Gosh, I mean, I know things that would not be appropriate to ask. They've never been asked of me.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, I know that probably people would be like, well, um, like, where did you come from? Things like that. I mean, those are really nice, like, startup questions. But when it gets like down to really big specifics, I think that as an adult, you know the answer to that. I think it's a generality to questions that are asked that they know the answer to, but they want to hear it from us,
Mm.
because I feel like it might solidify it for them. I think at this point in time, I'm really trying to just like figure out what my comfort levels are.
Yeah.
I haven't really been to the point where I'm like, this is uncomfortable for me. But again, I've done my research, provided some like really amazing things. If for the audience, if you all don't know about the YouTube channel Ask a Slave,
Yeah.
it is a very funny and very insightful way to know before you go. Just know like these are either the obvious questions or the questions that you probably should not ask.
Right.
Um,
I think you shouldn't ask anything that you wouldn't ask a stranger.
yeah,
Like, it's respect the person, right? Don't ask anything that you wouldn't ask anybody else.
you know,
That's
very
a good
physical
rule of-
questions,
right.
personal
And
questions, things like that.
I think as an interpreter, it's definitely okay to set boundaries. It's okay to not answer something if you're not comfortable with it.
Yep, yep. And I think, again, with Locust Grove giving us the power to say no or to switch to first person, I personally feel like at any given point, if I were ever to feel uncomfortable, I probably could just walk away from the conversation, and I would just either go to the office, or I would, put that in my pocket for later and just be like, well, I'm going to remember this, and, ask about how to answer that question at a later time, or how to not answer that question at a later time. And again, you said boundaries. I kind of wanted to touch on that in terms of like, enslaved peoples lived a very intimate life, and they had very, very traumatizing and or intimate experiences with their owners and with the people that they lived with. And so I think any questions pertaining to that outside of what, possible future dwellings that we might find or anything like that, that can start to slowly breach to inappropriate. So I think that knowing about, yes, not asking certain things about, our lives that you wouldn't ask a stranger, but if you do want to get deeper about something, I think that maybe asking, is there anything else you could tell me about that? Like, I'm kind of curious. And that puts the ball back into our court, and I can just say, no, I don't have anything to say about it. Or I don't want to talk about it. I'd just rather not. So I think questions that put the ball in our court might be able to be the ones that are better asked, even if they are more personal, because at the end of the day, if we can answer it or not answer it, then we know that the conversation's over.
Yeah. Eventually people move on, like if they don't get, they would just walk away too. I think it should go without saying, but it's not okay to touch an interpreter, any interpreter, right? Like, don't touch people. If you wouldn't run up and touch the just because we're playing a character doesn't mean, just because this is interactive doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries.
Yes. And I think especially when it comes to costuming and things of that nature, these things are sewed up tight, or they are tied up tight. And, I have my hair in a very particular style, and it's up. If it's touched, it could all come crashing down. And so I would really prefer not to be touched, especially obviously in our times. I'd rather not be touched.
It's just a matter of respect, really.
Correct. And I think that at this point we might have our faces covered in period. And so it'll give us even more of a boundary, I think. And so, before you head out, you can have those questions prepped, but you can also just know that there's that boundary of not just 6 feet, but, us already being part of a separate world, either coming into yours or you going into ours. And so that boundary there exists already. But it's also just personal space. Like, you are familiar with intimacy training. I'm familiar with intimacy training.
Yes, which is another one time I just started learning about this. And as I dig further and I start to interpret more, I would really love some work to be done with intimacy training and interpreting with the enslaved and with the people that play family members, because it gives, it's not just about, intimacy training isn't just about hugging and kissing, and like people use it to choreograph intimate scenes on stage, right? That's what intimacy training is. It's a way for us to map out what we're gonna do so that we're not just kissing and hugging all over people, right? And it builds the boundary that you need to not make it real for yourself, because before that, people were, if you're on stage or whatever and there's an intimate scene, you would just go for it. And we learned that wasn't so healthy for people, because it just wasn't. So
and intimacy doesn't even have to consider touch. It's if you're staring at someone too hard, in a lot of cultures, that's rude. And so you reach a point of intimacy with someone.
Yeah, literally the work that we're doing is intimate work because of the sensitive nature of it, of the enslaved and these people. So I would love to see some work where we take the time to really sit down and talk about it in that context and be able to form signals and cues for like tapping into character and then tapping out. We left it alone. We're no longer in that space. And Locust Grove does a good job of that. Like we always tend to have some kind of community, the interpreters get together at the end of a day and we kind of like eat whatever's in the kitchen or in the break room. So it's kind of that, woo, we're people again moment. That's what that is. I would love to get formalized in some way. I think that could be so beneficial for us.
And I think the way you just said it just now, like, well, we're people again, that like, that brought something back to me, which was, you know, how I said that, you know, sometimes we're portrayed as like mythical beings,
right?
Or like an entity. I think that we become historical figures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And landmarks and, you know, signals of a time that it you know, certain things were not okay and were okay that are completely opposite today. But we become figureheads for that thing. And I think that that also puts a little bit of a boundary between us and audience. And even then, there's still that intimacy because, you know, a lot of folks can still feel like, hey, I still have, as a customer, a right to interact with you in a certain way. And I mean, having come from Disney, this is a completely different experience.
Oh, did you?
From the guest experience at Disney. Yes. So this is like historical Disneyland. However, you still, with those characters, with like Disneyland characters, for example, you still can only do certain things. Like Disney characters and friends of characters do not sing for customers. They don't do those certain things, but they still have things that are okay with them and not okay with them. And so this is very much the same, just much less theme park rides.
Yeah. Building our own building our own rules along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they also typically have handlers, these characters, so that, you know, if something not okay happens, then it can be boop, broken off. And our docents do the exact same job, which is really nice. Thank you. Shout out to the docents. But that's, for me, all I need to know. All you all probably need to know about going to Locust Grove is really, we do want to interact. Certain things that one cannot answer just because history does not allow us to know it, and two are simply inappropriate. I hopefully you all will have more to look up about this, but there's also a really cool NPR audio that I just saw I just listened to, and there were some extremely inappropriate things that were said in that time space to an enslaved interpreter that worked at Mount Vernon. And first of all, don't think that could ever happen here. I would actually be surprised considering our climate, but at the same time, a lot of the things that we talk about, slaves being mythical people, people thinking, you know, that there's this entitlement, those things happen to that person. And so we're not beyond that. So I also ask the guests, if something seems odd to you in the space, please grant us the grace to step out of it if need be.
That's take care of themselves.
Yeah, and to take care of ourselves, and to, if you know you're burning for this answer, to guide you to the proper source, because it may just not be us at the end of the day.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, we want people to interact with us. We want to have conversations and still represent and honor the people that we're portraying. Yeah,
absolutely. So I really appreciated what you said about honoring the enslaved at Locust Grove, and I find it a huge responsibility to do so, and unfortunately, during COVID, I've just felt like so detached from everything, that like when the protests started up again, I was, I all of a sudden came into tune in something, but that also brought me back to the work that I was doing here. Um, and it makes me realize how much that people need to be honored, historical figures need to be honored. We just lost John Lewis, and really setting the precedent for what that actually means is to honor that person and to acknowledge that person's existence and what they did. Because at the end of the day, these enslaved folks built Locust Grove, like the incredible gardens, the houses, things like that. That's us. And my personal little ritual about the whole thing is to kind of just be alone. When I'm getting into costume, when I am, if I can help it, when I'm walking to the grounds, and on the grounds themselves, like I did mention that, I'm still somewhat apprehensive about what people are gonna like see when they see me. But even then, handling that alone is very interesting. And just kind of surveying the entire space that, is the legacy of the people that were enslaved there, not just the people that lived in the house. Because all that upkeep, the fact that, we were able to find and reconstruct it the way it is a testament to the tenacity that it takes to stay in the world.
I think for me, at first, I was just very worried about whether I would be able to do this and honor them the way they needed to be honored, because it is heavy, right? It's a lot when you think about the fact that somebody might come there and see you and interact with you and say, wow, well, this is the closest thing I'm gonna have to, talking to an enslaved person for real. Like that, we are the representation. We are the first impression that they get. But similarly to you, I think it's very interesting that you say that. I tend to deal with it on the car ride home, or I can go there. I'm not always able to get dressed by myself, but I do like walking up to the grounds by myself and walking away. And I think it's also just part of our training as actors to be able to step into something and then step out of it, to step in and realize the weight, the importance, and then step out and be okay what I did. So that takes time, though. It doesn't happen overnight, especially with sensitive material like this. But eventually, I definitely got to the point where I can step in and I can step out. And I realize its importance, and I don't have to take that home with me if I don't want to.
And it, and even just kind of reveling in the beauty of the space, because it's still a beautiful space, but it sometimes feels like wrong to do it. But at the end of the day, like when I'm done, I kind of realize that I've done good work.
Yeah.
And I've educated folks and, made the presence of the people that were there known. Because I'm certain that if it were up to some folks, they would never want to see that again. And I think it's important to see that again and, contend and grapple with our history at any chance we get, because it just advances us.
One of my favorite things is when I get to be by myself, on the ground, like in costume, in person, and I just happen to be in the distillery by myself or in the kitchen by myself on a slow day. And I get to think about what were the people that were here in 1816 thinking in this spot, right? How are they feeling? And I try to put myself there. And I don't know, I enjoy that experience personally. I just feel closer to it when I just get to be by myself for a second and just live in it without having to be a representation, without having to be a face for a second, and just with it on my own. I think that's what I get out of it, actually, is just being able to sit there and acknowledge it and be grateful for my heritage too.
Yeah. Yeah,
to
and
meet them. Yep.
that's it really for me. That's what I think too. I like just breathe it in, and I'm like, wow, someone, you know, stood where I stood,
Right.
was where I was, and I'm walking this, and it's kind of a memorial ground
Yeah.
at the same time. So I am just kind of adding to their legacy, and hopefully, you know, being able to in my position in time right now say the things that they wanted to say, and perhaps do some of the things that they wanted to do. And so I kind of just see it as life passing on, but knowing stories and knowing the importance of those stories and the sensitivity of those stories is why I do it,
Yeah.
because it's very heavy work and not everyone can do it and not everyone has to. I don't think it's necessary for everyone to do so, but I think it's necessary for us to be there.
Yeah.
So,
I guess that's what we had to talk about today. I'm so glad everybody was able to join us for Let's Talk About It with Sidney.
thank you all. Thank you.
Any questions, please leave them in the comments so that we can answer them in our next series.
Hopefully you guys enjoy us, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye, guys.